Good afternoon. I'm so very pleased to be here. It was a big honor to get the invitation to come and moderate this debate, and I'm really interested in having a good discussion about this issue. I think there's a lot of material to go over, and I'm very pleased that we have the guests that we have with us to go over it. So if you gentlemen want to come up here, I've got a couple of opening remarks I want to make to try to set the stage as to where we are in terms of the law and what's happening with medical marijuana and marijuana legalization in general. And you'll forgive me, I'm going to read off a card here just because I want to make sure I get all this right. So in 1996, which was 18 years ago, California became the first state to allow for the legal use of medical marijuana. Now there are 21 states that have legalized medical marijuana. Several more states have changed their laws to allow patients access to cannabis products. 2 states, as you've heard a couple of references to, Colorado and Washington, have legalized marijuana for recreational use, so it can be used as alcohol and tobacco are. But Ohio has no laws allowing for marijuana use, in spite of efforts in the last few years, both in the legislature and for potential ballot issues to put them before voters. The last Quinnipiac poll on medical marijuana that is, in February, showed voters support it 87% to 11%. That's an 8-to-1 margin. So it could be argued that medical marijuana is the most popular law that Ohio does not have. It's been proposed in the legislature several times and has gone absolutely nowhere. It has never gone to the ballot. One reason that the argument goes that it's not gone to the ballot is because there's never been a big money organized effort to actually bring the issue to voters. But that may be changing. There are reports that medical marijuana supporters are working on a big, well-funded effort to try to get medical marijuana on the ballot in the next 2 years, and also that there are groups that are working in cities to try to change local laws. So why doesn't Ohio have a medical marijuana law if indeed the polls are right and there is overwhelming support for it? Well, obviously the state still does have a major heroin and opioid painkiller problem, and there's evidence that drug use starts among kids. The 2013 Ohio Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is done by the Ohio Department of Health, showed 21%. That's over 1/5, almost a quarter of high school students had reported using marijuana in the last month. And stats have shown that 1 in 6 kids who smoke pot will become addicted. The people who say that medical marijuana and legalizing marijuana in general is a bad idea, they argue that if medical marijuana becomes legal, all the pill mills that the state has been trying to shut down over the last couple of months could turn into pot mills. And that there are credible alternatives such as clinical trials and other programs in legitimate medical institutions, of which Ohio has many, where people can access the treatment that they need that may deal with their issues. And they say legalizing marijuana could lead to what's happened in Colorado and Washington, which is where it's been legalized for recreational use. And they say that could hurt a lot of people, especially vulnerable populations and the poor. More addiction, more crime, another thing to spend money on instead of essential items. But backers say there's still lots of evidence that marijuana helps relieve pain and speed recovery for a variety of illnesses and diseases, including cancer, that doctors such as the American College of Physicians support the use of medical marijuana, and that this gateway effect has been overstated and may not actually exist. Plus, they note that marijuana is the 3rd most popular recreational drug in the country behind alcohol and tobacco. Nearly 100 million Americans have used it, more than 14 million do so regularly, and then they say our laws should reflect that reality, not try to deny it or change it. So enough for me. Let's hear from the experts who have strong opinions and arguments on this issue. And I'll introduce them in the order you're going to hear from them. Robert Ryan is with the Ohio chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. He's also said his cancer treatment improved when he added marijuana to the drugs he was already taking. He'll be talking a little bit about that. Paul Coleman is the president and CEO of Maryhaven, a treatment facility here in Columbus for people whose lives have been interrupted by addictive or mental illnesses. And he's concerned about addiction as well as other health issues that could come up from marijuana use, even for medicinal purposes. So please, let's welcome them up here to the stage. So it was decided that Mr. Ryan will go ahead and present his arguments first. You have a couple of minutes to make your arguments, and I'll give Paul Coleman the same. Go right ahead.
Okay, you'll give me an indication when I talk too much.
I will.
All right.
I'll give you about 2 minutes. How about that?
All right. Thank you very much for inviting us, especially to a joint meeting like this between the Kiwanis and the Rotary. One of the key aspects on marijuana prohibition that the Rotarians should be aware of is apply the 4-way test. to marijuana prohibition. Okay? Is it the truth? Okay? Marijuana, as defined by United States government and Ohio, is that it is a Schedule I drug. In layman's terms, that means it's deadly, addictive, and with no medical use. A little bit more exacting on those details is the one I said first, deadly. Schedule I defines a drug that has no accepted safety of use under medical professionals. Medical professionals deal with some very powerful drugs, some that can kill you easily under anesthesia. There has not been one single person in recorded history who has died from marijuana. It's physiologically impossible. Not so with alcohol or the long-term effects of tobacco or even the short-term effects of a child ingesting tobacco juice, which is deadly. Okay? The second point was the medical aspect, no accepted medical aspect. I've almost lost count of how many states now have medical marijuana laws of one form or another. My little brochure that I have here, I had to pencil in number 23 for the New York State, okay? The other aspect is that it is a drug of high abuse. The other drugs that are in that Schedule I are the likes of heroin, okay? That is, without a doubt, one of the most highly addictive drugs on the planet. Right next to it is tobacco, okay? And underneath it, in Schedule II, of all things, is cocaine. Now tell me, raise your hands, if you think marijuana is deadly, addictive, and with no medical use. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Ryan spoke for 2.5 minutes. I'll give you 2.5 minutes. Paul Coleman, go right ahead.
Karen, thank you very much. I would like to give you information this afternoon on this topic based on our work at Maryhaven and also on some national evidence. Maryhaven is the oldest and most comprehensive provider of behavioral health care in Central Ohio with a specialization in addiction recovery. We have been in business for 61 years. Marijuana was a presenting problem for our patients 61 years ago, and it is a presenting problem for our patients today. Marijuana is a gateway drug for the vast majority of our patients at Maryhaven. Out of the 8,000 patients we treated last year at Maryhaven, I would be surprised if more than 5% would say they have never used marijuana. Nationally, the incidence of addictive illness is about 1 in every 11 users. About 9% of people who use marijuana will become addictive, and that is according to a recent edition of the New England Journal of Medicine. More troubling, marijuana is the drug of choice for slightly over half of our adolescent patients at Maryhaven. Incidence of addictive illness in adolescent users is about 1 in 6, or about 17%, again, per the New England Journal of Medicine. And according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, we see increased prevalence among adolescents in states that have allowed medical marijuana. And medical marijuana seems to be an enticing argument, but why would we want any other process to approve our medicine other than the scientific process involving the Food and Drug Administration review, testing, and approval? We certainly have empathy for patients who suffer, but how is that empathy fulfilled if we give a patient something that has not been proven safe and effective by empirical science? In conclusion, Why, in our society today, with all the challenges we face, would we want to legalize a second intoxicant, a second psychoactive drug? Thank you.
Thank you both. Perfect timing on both of these gentlemen. Before we move into questions, I want to note that there are two cameras here. One is for CTV. They're testing some programming here, and this may be one of the programs that they put on. And the other is my camera from our TV show, The State of Ohio, which I produce for Ohio Public Radio and Television. And so I just wanted to let you know that you're being watched as you watch our guests here. So I want to start, we solicited questions, the folks at Rotary and Kiwanis solicited questions from you folks about what you would like to hear these gentlemen talk about. And I'll get to those in just a moment, but I do want to start with one question. And I'm going to give it to both of these gentlemen, but I'll start with you, Mr. Ryan. There are reports of a big, well-funded campaign that would take the issue of medical marijuana to the ballot, kind of modeled after the campaign that was done by Penn National and Dan Gilbert to bring casino gambling to the ballot and get voter approval for that. Do you know of any plans to do this?
I have heard of those indirectly. They have not contacted me, okay? I know they've contacted the Ohio Rights Group, which is the one that was one of the more, out of the three ballot efforts that have been approved by the Attorney General, is the one that's a little bit more vigorous. I am not aware of any direct contact with NORML from this organization. I have very tangential knowledge of what they're proposing. I have quite some issues with it, but my answer is no.
And let me ask you, Mr. Coleman, if indeed this does come to the ballot and lots of money is spent to try to convince voters that medical marijuana is the right thing, what would be the strategy of those who disagree to fight that?
The strategy would simply be to try and educate, and we can begin that today. We can begin that by my asking all of you to do what I know you would do on any issue that is being well funded for the ballot. Ask yourself who is funding it and why.
All right, let's move into some questions from you folks. The first one, and I'll start with Mr. Ryan here since he definitely has a personal experience with this. Is marijuana too dangerous to be used as medicine?
Absolutely not. Marijuana has been used as a therapeutic agent for thousands of years, okay? I have used it myself. When I came back, I'm a comeback to Ohio, and I was a member of the Republican Party there where I offered resolutions to support medical marijuana that culminated in the Darrell Putnam bill. When I came back to Ohio, I myself got cancer, lost significant amounts of weight under treatment, and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm going to try it myself. I had my full support of my oncologist, and I spent the greater part of the year in a chemical lazy boy lounge. That's chemo, okay? My wife, the first time I did it, she says, oh my God, that really works. You now want to eat, you want to come down, you want to, rather than laying under the couch all day long, you know, being ill, this works. As I said, I had the full support of my oncologist, and at the end, he said, Rob, you're one of the few patients that have actually gained weight during your chemo.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Coleman, hearing stories like that, and there are many stories like that, what do you say? Is marijuana too dangerous to be used as medicine?
I think the short answer right now is we don't know. I think in many cases there are some effects of some of the ingredients in marijuana that may be helpful in some conditions. But I think it's useful to know that most major medical associations oppose medical marijuana, including the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Cancer Society, and the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. I think as it goes through the process, which sometimes can be agonizingly slow, of federal approval through the Food and Drug Administration, We will find these things out, and we will do it in a rigorous scientific way.
All right, another question from the audience. And again, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ryan, because most of these questions seem to be directed at your side of the issue here.
Is there a chance for the interchange?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Do you have something you'd like to?
Yes, I do.
All right.
A number of those organizations have been listed, and many more have passed resolutions at their various conventions that's supporting the study or the medical use of marijuana. I think there's at least 35 or 40 of those organizations. I will be more than willing to provide the president of this organization, then yourself, with the list of those.
Any final word?
The organizations that I was able to research are organizations which I think are very well respected. Of course, it doesn't mean that they're always right, but I think the American Medical Association is probably the association, the trade association for physicians in our country.
Well, the next audience question kind of builds on what you were saying, Mr. Ryan, about your personal experience. The question is, in 1972, the U.S. Congress placed marijuana in Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act, as you mentioned, because they considered it to have no acceptable medical use. So what studies have shown that that has changed?
Let's take it back. What studies supported their assertion? Let me go back a little further than that 1972 decision. In the late 60s, marijuana was under what's called the Federal Tax Stamp Act, and it was brought up to the Supreme Court where it was a catch-22 law. And at that time, all of a sudden, federal law didn't apply. And so the federal government had to do something, okay? And if you remember that time was a little bit tumultuous, okay? And so they came up with this category of scheduling of various aspects about how useful it is, how addictive it is, how it's safe, okay? And at that point in time, the Congress was trying to fit marijuana into one of those schedules. They couldn't do it. They went up to the White House and said, "We're stuck, okay? What should we do?" And the president at the time was President Nixon, and he said, "Put it into the most dangerous schedule, Schedule I, as a message to the kids." There was no science to even put it there.
All right. You have about 1:20 to respond to that, Mr. Coleman, if you'd like to.
The side effects of marijuana are well known. They include addictive illness, extended periods of lethargy, and motor vehicle collisions. Visits to the emergency rooms due to marijuana use increased from 16,000 in 1991 to 374,000 in 2008, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Also, it is absolutely true, thank God, that there are no recorded known overdose deaths from marijuana. But please understand that the incidence and prevalence of addictive illness are twice as high in states that have legalized marijuana as states that have not. Why is it Schedule I? Two-pronged test. Danger, which I hope I have covered, and secondly, medical efficacy. And so far, there has been no proven medical efficacy of marijuana, particularly in its smoked form.
Let me ask you, Mr. Ryan, any rebuttal?
Yes, I do. One of the things was the addictive charge. Marijuana simply is not the same as heroin or cocaine or tobacco. Mm-hmm. It is not. I have meetings all throughout the state, and one of the things I ask my members is, did you ever have to give up marijuana? Oh, yes, I had to take a drug test. And I said, oh, did you suffer? Did you, have withdrawals? And they looked at me like, what are you, stupid? Okay? It doesn't happen. Lethargy? Oh my God, are you kidding me? Look at the basketball players, they're their highest percentage of marijuana users, and you think they're lethargic? That's just unbelievable, okay? I'm sorry. But the last aspect was about the rise in the number of treatments, okay? That is propelled by a law enforcement action that says go to treatment or go to jail.
Mr. Coleman, any final words on that?
There are many well-known effects of marijuana use. Addiction is clearly demonstrated in about 9% of the population. Addiction for other drugs, absolutely, Mr. Ryan is correct, is much higher. The addiction rate for marijuana users is about 9%. That's the same as for alcohol. And again, I return to my proposition. Why would our society today want to legalize a second intoxicant?
That brings me to another question, and I'll start with you, Mr. Coleman, for this one. Why not allow legalized marijuana, especially when there can be benefits for medical purposes, when we already do legalize alcohol, legalize tobacco, which you yourself have said, at least in alcohol's case, there's plenty of evidence that shows it's addictive.
Western society has a 5,000-year history of the use of alcohol. We couldn't get rid of it even if we tried, and I think we did. By the way, there are good empirical studies that during Prohibition, first of all, crime went up, and secondly, the incidence and prevalence of death from alcohol-related disease, such as cirrhosis, went down. So did Prohibition work? Yes and no. But it won't work now. We can't do it now. On the other hand, marijuana is a second intoxicant. It is very attractive to young people who mistakenly believe that it's okay. And if you want to know why, all you need to do is look at popular culture and indeed look at the statements of certain elected officials. So it is a very, very difficult problem, but I don't think the fact that alcohol causes us problems in about 10% of the users means that we should legalize another drug which will cause us problems in about 9 or 10% of the users.
Mr. Ryan, I'll give you about a minute 20 to respond.
The basic fundamental question there is addiction a crime? Okay, that's the question you got to answer yourself. Is this how we're treat addicts? Okay, even if everything he says is true, is jail the answer, or a law enforcement perspective the answer? Okay, the other thing that was brought up was alcohol's okay because we have been having it in our Western history. Okay, I'll challenge anybody in this room to spell marijuana correctly. Okay, I'll go right to the heart of the matter. In the Ohio Revised Code, it's not M-I-R-I-J, it's M-I-R-I-H. Okay, in United States history, it used to be called cannabis and hemp. Marijuana came into the vernacular in the early 1900s because we didn't like those Mexican wetbacks coming into the country and taking those farm jobs. Marijuana prohibition, drug laws prohibition, are the hidden tool of racism.
Moving on to another question here, unless you'd like to respond, Mr. Coleman?
I think that's fine. Thank you, Karen.
Let me turn this one back over to you, Mr. Ryan. Another question from the audience. Is the medical reason, the medical marijuana reason, just a gateway to legalize marijuana overall? Is that the step that naturally would follow?
I'm a little bit at odds with some of my members here in Ohio, okay? I'm a patient, or was a patient, but I'll never succumb to saying, sign me up for a card, I'm a medical patient. I think that the medical marijuana will never, ever be a prescription medication here in Ohio. The FDA has never had a plant as being a registered drug, okay? But the full medical benefits of marijuana its constituents, its components, its derivatives, the plant itself, will only ever be fully realized when marijuana itself is legal. Please don't tell me I can take a vitamin C tablet, but I can't have an orange.
All right, I'll give you about a minute to respond, Mr. Coleman.
Medical marijuana is a fact in 23 states. Let's take a look at some of the statistics. In Denver, 72% of adolescents under 18 in treatment report they got marijuana from a medical card holder. There is leakage. If it is legal for medical purposes, there will be leakage not only in the community, but look at the states that surround those states with medical marijuana. They are seeing it being brought in. And in those 2 states that have legalized medical marijuana, 80% of all medical card holders are men between the ages of 17 and 35 with no history of chronic illness. Please understand that compassionate use of some of the ingredients of marijuana is, in my opinion, something that we need to continue to investigate and investigate vigorously and with deliberate speed. I take nothing away from patients who honestly have an acute illness which they say can be alleviated by marijuana. But for heaven's sakes, let's not change the law because of that.
I fully agree with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Paul Coleman. I think the medical marijuana excuse has been well overplayed, okay? There are people out there that are not sick, that are holding cards. But we talk about leakage across one state to another. We have leakage across our borders, okay? Marijuana is one of the 60% of the drug cartel's product, okay? We have Guatemalans in our country, children at our borders trying to come in because they're trying to escape what's called, in their own terms, we're a drug war refugee because we have such violence going on. I say legalize it, tax it, control it, have ID cards, and put the thugs out of business.
Real briefly, Mr. Coleman.
Legalizing marijuana, I would submit for your consideration, may not act to reduce use or crime. Criminals will seek to price compete. Criminals will also seek to compete on product. Believe me, they don't call them pushers for no reason. And if we do legalize marijuana, as has happened in Colorado and Washington, there will probably be very heavy tax. The tax in Colorado is 37%. Many of us in this room are in business. Wouldn't you like it if your competitor had to pay a 37% tax? Do you think you could undercut them on price? And on product. One of the saddest things I see is when I get calls from reporters and concerned members of our community about some new drug that's in the community. Usually it's a variation of hallucinogen, which are terrible, just terrible. And what the pusher is saying is, hey, this is new. This will give you a better high. There is no reason to believe that the business model for pushers and cartels won't change in response to legalization.
I have another question that I'd like to direct to you first, Mr. Coleman. The question is, Ohio has spent millions of dollars educating its citizens on the dangers of smoking. Will we in the next several years spend millions more on the dangers of smoking marijuana or ingesting it through other means?
Well, I would hope not. I think that question is actually a very sound argument against legalization. We're talking about a delivery system for a drug. and the principal delivery system for the drug marijuana is smoking. I don't think I have to tell anyone here that smoking is not good for you. Now, I will tell you this. The people who I have talked to who use marijuana, even very heavy users, don't come close to 3 packs a day. But can we say that smoking any plant, whether it is tobacco or marijuana, is good for your lungs or good for the environment? I don't think so.
I'll give you a chance to
That's
respond.
interesting because the largest lung study that has ever been conducted by Dr. Tashkin included for the first time marijuana. It was a repetition of many other studies, and it said smoking tobacco causes a variety of different conditions, okay? In the marijuana-only population, they really couldn't detect any kind of differences, okay? But what was most interesting, okay, was those particular people who smoked tobacco and marijuana. And they had a lesser rate of the various illnesses that affected the traditional smoker only, okay? And it was kind of curious why that was. Tobacco is an inflammatory, okay? Marijuana is an anti-inflammatory. That's one of the reasons why it's so useful for pain relief. And one of the things about cancers, okay, they thrive in a inflamed kind of condition where cells are multiplying, okay, whereas the marijuana is an apoptosis, where it allows cells to die, okay? So, you know, I hear things about, you know, let's keep it illegal. And I heard about taxes, okay? I think he's right, okay? The Colorado taxes are so high, they're keeping the illegal marijuana dealers in business, okay? The same thing would happen with our taxes on cigarettes and alcohol, but we have it under control right now, okay? It's a small problem. I see keeping marijuana prohibition alive is just a support mechanism for the dealers and the terrorists.
Real briefly, Mr. Coleman.
We're talking about the evidence that marijuana is bad for the lungs. And I'm going to quote again the New England Journal of Medicine. This is a June 5th, 2014 paper that was published in that journal. And they say that the risk for lung cancer is low. But what else do they say on a table they publish on risk levels? Addiction to marijuana and other substances, the risk level is high. Abnormal brain development, the risk normal is medium. Progression to use of other drugs, medium risk. Schizophrenia, medium risk. Diminished lifetime achievement, high. Motor vehicle accidents, high. Chronic bronchitis, high.
I'll let you respond, Mr. Ryan.
Well, I actually found one of the more interesting things there was about the driving, okay? Just a few days ago, the Congress held a hearing on stoned driving. The National Highway Transportation Administrator came up and testified that they have no basis, nothing solid that says marijuana, even in its highest form, comes anywhere near the alcohol effects. Okay, and then you brought up people of accomplishment, okay? There was a fellow who used to have the Cosmo Show. His name was Dr. Carl Sagan, okay? Some of you might recognize who he is. He was a very famous scientist. He discovered some very interesting things about our solar system, planned out the Mars missions. He was a marijuana smoker. He was a heavy-duty marijuana smoker, okay? Another man of accomplishment is some of you might watch the TV shows, okay, about traveling through Europe, okay? Mr. Reeves.
Steves.
Rich Steves, rather. Thank you very much, okay? He sits on the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana board. Okay? So this thing about, lethargy and decreased intellect, that is pure propaganda. There are surely people that are out there on all sides of the spectrum on that. There are smart people, there are stupid people. They use marijuana, they don't use marijuana.
Well, with that, unfortunately, we have to end the question and answer segment. I'd like to give both of our respondents here a chance to make some concluding remarks, 2 to 3 minutes. And I started with you, so we'll start with Mr. Coleman this time.
We had 8,000 patients that we cared for last year at Maryhaven. I doubt if one of them would have one good thing to say about marijuana. Mr. Ryan has done a good job presenting an alternative point of view, and I know we will consider it carefully, but I would respectfully submit that Dr. Sagan and Rick Steves are the exceptions that might tend to prove the rule. Internationally, the Netherlands is famous for its legalization of recreational marijuana. The Rand Corporation reports that lifetime use tripled among young adults after legalization. I would simply close by asking the same question I've asked several times. Why, in today's society, with the challenges we face in our city, our state, and our country, would we want to add a legal second intoxicant, a second legal psychoactive drug? Thank you for your attention.
All right, you have about 1.5 minutes if you'd like to respond, or I'm sorry for your closing remarks.
Okay. Well, I hear this all the time about adding another legal drug. Well, do you think marijuana is not here? Do you think it's going to go away? It's here. It's been here for a long, long time, okay? I tell my friends and my foes the same thing. I say marijuana legalization is going to happen, so just deal with it, okay? And then I give them a pat on the back and say, it's going to be okay, okay? The world's not going to come to an end, okay? Let's say everything Mr. Coleman said is true. And we can go back and forth on this study and that study, okay? All right? But is jail, law enforcement use, the answer to those? And the answer, in my experience, is no. I was at one of the, talking about violence, okay? I was at a police conference on the West Coast where we had about half the number of police officers in this, people in this room, okay? And the moderator asked a question, they talk about dangerous assignments. And what is one of the most dangerous assignments? And that was about the domestic violence. And he asked, how many have involved alcohol? Hands all over the room raised up. And then he said, how many have involved marijuana? It's simply not the same as alcohol. It is far, far safer. People die from alcohol. People have very serious addiction issues with alcohol. But the fundamental question is, even if it's an addiction, is jail the answer? Is taking away people's freedoms the answer? Is taking away people's driver's licenses away? Is taking away people's right to have a firearm, hunters here in Ohio, so on and so forth, or having patients kicked out of their pain clinic because they test positive for marijuana? It's simply we need to deal with this issue, and the only way we're going to actually deal with this is to get it out of the hands of the thugs and the criminals and into professionals. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you all for the questions. They were great questions, and really thank you very much for the invitation to be up here. I really had a good time. Hope you learned something.